Chugach did have a significant pipeline maintenance contract over the years, at different times over the years. But by and large, the most significant business interest has been in what's called 8A government contracting. And this is where Chugach has been taking advantage of another Senator Stevens amendment to the Small Business Administration, allowing ANCSA corporations this ability to contract or negotiate contracts with the federal government as opposed to going through a process of bidding and this kind of thing. And that's one of the very first things that we did at Chugach was begin the process of government contracting. We done good, as they say in the South. Well, at the time ANCSA was passed, it was, I have to say, it was pretty heady days, pretty heady times. It was lots of excitement, lots of promise, lots of opportunity. And it wasn't until we started getting into the details of implementing ANCSA and examining the different sections in ANCSA that we begin to realize that maybe ANCSA wasn't everything that we had hoped it was going to be. And as I recall talking to many Native leaders, it was strictly a land settlement. It was never intended to address Indian country issues. It was never intended to address sovereignty issues. And so new leadership comes into our Native communities and organizations, and they're very critical of ANCSA because there's provisions in ANCSA that says that we forever give up our Aboriginal rights to hunting and fishing. It doesn't address sovereignty, and it doesn't address Indian country, and so that was a new sounding board that I don't think the initial leaders of ANCSA really even thought about. But the wonderful thing about ANCSA is it's a living, breathing document, and because of unity and the leadership of AFN and others, they're able to amend ANCSA. And ANCSA has been amended so many times. Whenever, for example, when the sunset clauses, the 20-year clauses started looming, well, they created the 91 amendments to allow for perpetual ownership of our lands, and the only time your lands get taxed is if you develop the smallest tract, and it extends the ability to keep your stock from being sold, except through extraordinary measures by votes of the shareholders. But it also allowed for villages and regional corporations to allow for new natives to come in. And some villages and regional corporations have indeed taken advantage of the 91 amendments by opening up their rolls to allow new natives to become shareholders. ANILCA, of course, gave back some of the rights that were restricted under ANCSA, but it gave back in a way that was called a rural preference, not necessarily a native preference. There's still conflicts between the state of Alaska and the federal government over subsistence hunting and fishing. But I think because of that unity and the leadership, ANCSA is continuing to be amended to recapture, if you will, some of those provisions that may have gotten restricted under the original ANCSA bill. And so for that reason, I think ANCSA still has a lot of potential. And the way I look at ANCSA, it became a model for how other land settlements across the globe have occurred. And other groups have improved on ANCSA. They found other ways to make it work for them. This has been done in some tribes in the lower 48. It's happened in tribes in Canada. It's happening as we speak in Hawaii with indigenous people in Hawaii. And it's happened in other indigenous communities in the Pacific as well as in South America. So I think all of them have looked at ANCSA as the very beginning model. There's certainly a lot of things, it wasn't designed to satisfy every need and want that we could possibly have, but at least we set up the structure for them to work off of. I can say that the future of ANCSA is kind of problematic because there are certain congressmen from other states that think that under the SBA rules and regulations that ANCSA corporations are getting too much of a good deal, and they're making moves to try to put restrictions on ANCSA corporations. If they're successful, that could create a whole new set of problems and challenges for ANCSA corporations because some of them have gotten very used to having these relationships with government contractors and or agencies, and to have that pulled out from under them is going to create a whole new set of problems. For some of the villages, I think global warming or climate change is going to have an effect. On the lands for subsistence reasons. That's still being played out today. There's already elders in many regions of Alaska that are starting to see changes in the land and in fish that are coming back into their waters, coming back very changed and different. So ANCSA corporations involved with dealing with their land and resources, climate change could present or pose a problem. I often believe that that there is room for ANCSA corporations to more fully embrace their culture, more fully embrace their language, their traditional songs and singing and dancing. And I think that could, if it's done correctly, could become a form of a business enterprise that they could take advantage of the internet. They could take advantage of globalization. And they could use those cultural strengths as a way of generating revenues and sustaining the culture. Because I believe there is a market in the world for people wanting to find and learn more about those indigenous cultures, and they're just hungry for that kind of knowledge. And here we are up here with our 220-some tribes that and regional corporations that have a beautiful and wonderful culture that it doesn't have to be the only thing they do, of course, but it could sustain them in many ways.